Yeah, first off, the coaching search. I think that's the biggest thing. And, plugging back to the website again, vtscoop.com just dropped Hotboard 1.0 with 8 candidates that, names to watch in this whole deal, to watch as it gets closer to deadline. Obviously, lots to shake out. Maybe the biggest news of the day and something we'd been hinted at over on the site was the big sit down with obviously current athletic director Whit Babcock and him sitting down with local media, which VT Scoop and 24/7 Sports wasn't invited to anyway. Obviously, still had the tip and the inside skinny on that, but obviously didn't get the invite there, just with politics and a lot of things going around, circulating the board and the committee and the process and just everything going on over there right now. But yeah, I guess innately when signing NDAs and in this process between Whit and the committee members, they're not going to have that sit down anymore. And I think a lot of that is going to tie back into wanting one message out there from one unified front. And, when you have Bruce Arians coming out and saying one thing and Eddie Royal coming out and different people coming out and saying different things, it doesn't really sound like a unified front. When Whit sits down with Bill Roth and says a lot of things that seem pretty maybe counterproductive to what you're hearing from different board members and people on the board and search committee on who's decision makers of different things, it just puts everyone in a tough spot, because this was something where you could really, really kind of control the narrative on how you wanted to frame it. And now you're kind of way behind the 8 ball, just letting the rumor mill spiral and people contrive claims. And we'll get into this even a little bit later on the team level of how they've sort of really done players no favors in different ways of letting people sort of run wild in their imagination of what could be happening with different situations. But just, I know a lot's been made of the situation and rolling it out. There's different things that they want to get out there that I think they've done pretty effective at. But just overall, I don't think the leaking is the big thing. It's just trying to get everyone on the same page. And then when you rile up a fan base or a different group and you have different perspective people looking at it, it doesn't always make it the most attractive, especially when you're at a place where there's a history and lineage and patterns of having ineffective leadership and admin and back channeling under the same administration now for over a decade, and beyond Merriman into Burris, it's the same thing. So when you look up the scale of chain of command, who you're going to be working for, who's going to really have the final say there, and it's just kind of a history of dysfunction. And a lot of really quality jobs are coming open. Penn State just came open. Florida's probably going to come open. Auburn's probably going to come open. Wisconsin's looking like it's going to come open. What happens down in Tallahassee? I know I'm looking forward to that road trip for that game and get some time on 30A like a lot of these other coaches will be probably doing here soon. But it's just, in a cycle where you think and you saw so many potential job openings happening, to be so behind the 8 ball. And, like these coaches, if you want to be real honest, obviously the target demographic of this show is Virginia Tech fans. You have to be really honest with where Virginia Tech shapes up in this whole search. And with all these jobs coming open, we'll get into names here and different things, but you kind of have to reset expectations of what the administration, what there's a history and pattern of in recent years, and how the game sort of passed you by in a little bit. Like I know so many people want to look back to, can we just get back to what Frank was doing and 10 wins in a season? Like, is Alabama and Ohio State and Georgia going to get back to 10 wins in a regular season with the competitive balance of college football, the parity of the way it is? I think you need to sort of reset expectations in a way. We'll get into it. Like James Franklin obviously just got let go at Penn State. And I know his record of, if you think you have to make a move, then make it now. But to pay $50 million just with the way money is right now in college football to someone to let him go away when last year, you're a successful drive away from going to the national championship game, won the Fiesta Bowl. You played in 3 New Year's Six Bowls in 3 consecutive years. You took a program out of the depths, Big Ten champion. I know for a long time, the Big Ten was not as competitive or as deep as it is right now. And, recruiting slipped or whatever it was, but it's just maybe you need to reset expectations, because look how quick, everyone's screaming Dan Mullen's name, and we'll talk about him and some other names. But look at Florida. I think they would really take Dan Mullen back in a heartbeat, as opposed to what they've got with Billy Napier, because they're going to be right back in that cycle. Same with Auburn and Gus Malzahn there when you have Harston coming in there. So it just puts you in a bad spot when all these other jobs that are more attractive coming open, and, there's a track record, and different candidates have history with the track record of people in the administration, which can make it a mess. But I think that's important. I know I just kind of rambled on just the state of college football, but I feel like that's important in the whole search, just setting the scene of what jobs are coming open, being realistic with what people are looking for, why it's tough when there's a lot to like about the job outside looking in. But then at the same time, there's going to be those questions, and it doesn't help when you see news coming out about the Board of Visitors and how that's getting driven. And obviously the situation that just happened a year ago in Chapel Hill with how that search went down. And when you see things coming out where it's driven by certain donors and people on the board, and there's just not that alignment, as everyone wants to say. So I want to make it abundantly clear that the current athletic director, Witt, is not very involved in this process. You know, it almost sounds like in some of these meetings he's acting as a secretary almost, or just like carrying the bags. Like, so I don't know why that was driven that way. It's just obviously you don't want anyone coming out there and stepping in it again. And it kind of seems like that's the situation they found themselves in. So if you want to cover that up in an NDA at a public school or however that works, that's what they're going to go forward moving with. I don't think they're indebted to, or it's a responsibility. They don't have to say anything. I mean, this is going to still come out one way or the other. It's just you haven't done yourself any favors. Your candidate pool, the players, just you haven't really done anyone any favors, let alone yourself. So I can make that a little bit more difficult, but I know they still feel pretty vindicated in how it's going to shake out. So we'll just have to see with that process. So maybe the process just feels slow and they're trying to set up that actual alignment. We'll see. Because, you know, you're waiting and you're losing that momentum, but you rush and you miss the guy. But it just seems like you can't get that unified front from everyone. And that's led to some issues. And obviously just the way the whole sphere of college football right now is doing you no favors with just jobs coming open. Some seismic shifts could still happen here later in the season. It's just really set the parameter, set the gauge, how the interest of where and how competitive this job is compared to it, and how you're going to set your candidate pool up for success with who's here and making sure that message is getting out. And I don't think that's been done effectively. And now, you know, with no game to talk about, a lot's going to be said on the bye week, and vtscoop.com over on the tunnel message board. A lot of people have shared those same concerns, and it's very valid. So we'll see how that goes. Bringing up obviously some different names in the questions and some things. Obviously, James Franklin was let go at Penn State. A lot's been made about that he has the clause in his contract to have to go try and find work or whatever, however that shakes out, or legal language in the contract to go do that. A lot's been made on social media, on x.com, on vtscoop.com about James Franklin. I think, you know, it's kind of preposterous. Like I led the show talking about this is a guy who has had immense success at Penn State. Obviously, maybe hasn't gotten over that hump to what the fans wanted or you expected a place like that. But where Virginia Tech is, I mean, you're staring down arguably, 2-3 win seasons in the last 4 years. James Franklin's a guy who has went in and went 120 and 40 or something at Penn State, and Big Ten championship. I think 10 plus wins the last 3 years, 10 plus wins. And I think 6 out of the 12 or 8 out of the 12 years he's been there. I mean, you'd almost be foolish to not try and knock down that door. Now, I don't think that's going to be an option. I think better jobs are going to come open, and they're going to go knocking for James Franklin, someone who's done it at Vanderbilt and Penn State, and honestly done it the right way. I know a lot of people feel a certain way about him for how he handles the media, for how he maybe comes off as arrogant. But I mean, you talk to his players, when you talk to these recruits on the road, I mean, that's one of the biggest things when covering recruiting, even locally in the state of Virginia. Penn State's eating Virginia Tech's lunch just in the state. And you talk to the players who are getting recruited by Penn State and Virginia Tech, or maybe even they end up committing to Penn State, but they're a local guy that I've got to interface with just directly, talking to the players, the parents of the players, very personable. We'll call them. You get sent a text that responds immediately, remembers birthdays, relatives, if someone's in the hospital checking in, very, very personable and on the recruiting front, developer of men, which I think gets lost in this day and age, and someone who's also just very successful on the football field. So almost shocking to see that 7 games in the year when even just a couple of weeks ago, it's the whiteout game. You're leading Oregon at home in overtime, but it's a performance-based game. And if you think you're going to have to make a move, I guess you have to make it. But just with so much going on in college football to pony that up, I think James Franklin will definitely be given a call, be on the list. It's just, is he going to have interest back? I think that's going to be big. I think the next group that you're going to have to look at is maybe that G5 tier, talking about John Summerall at Tulane, Alex Golish at USF, and then Silverfield at Miami, amongst some other guys in that G5 ranks. But I mean, obviously those were all really, really hot names for all these openings. You know, it's not just Virginia Tech looking at these guys who are kind of under the radar. I think in past years, you would have seen a Summerall and a Golish type and jump to some other jobs, maybe some lower quality jobs. But now with the way things are, you have leverage. And for them, it doesn't make sense to make that jump. Why not go wait for that SEC school or that opening to open up and then take the jump? And I think probably most of those guys are bound for that. I'm I think a lot of those guys have really, really redeeming qualities, but I just don't know how viable or realistic they will be here. Like if they really have the interest, like you can see positive things, but a lot of these young up and coming G5 guys like them probably going to have their sight set a little higher than Virginia Tech. And I think they're going to have those options open to them. Those are a couple of G5 names. Like I said, the darling of VTscoop.com for the longest time has been Dan Mullen out at UNLV. I mean, when screening these guys, you're going to see flags pop up everywhere. And it just comes back to the same thinking that's going to be touched on a lot on this committee is, are you actually committed to maybe peeling out the old guard and ripping things up and changing things like a lot's been made of? Or is it just kind of, oh, well, front facing, client facing, we're going to change this and that, but it's going to be the same back end? Because, like if it's just the VT way of doing things, a lot of programs will look past certain things or different deals and work through that in the vetting process. Everyone's going to have stuff come up, but it's just, are you really committed to that? And that ties into Shane. Obviously, Shane Beamer's name had an article come out with Brad Crawford on CBS Sports, I think close to probably a month ago when the Pry news dropped. And I read back through it today, and yeah, it seems pretty prevalent. When you look at, now, I mean, bearing that it is Cocktober right now, and South Carolina could go on one crazy run, and a lot could shift down there. But, I mean, he's going to be feeling a lot of pressure here at the end of this year with the stretch he has coming up. A team that was picked decently high in the SEC preseason polls, a team that you had arguably a Heisman favorite in, and now he's staring down a really, really tough stretch, and the donors and different people down there are figuring it out. It's kind of a lose-lose situation at South Carolina. When you look at the success of people to come before him and where he's been, I think he's operated at a decent clip. And I know people point to, if you take his name off of it and you show them just his resume at South Carolina, he wouldn't be an attractive hire. But obviously his last name is Beamer, and that means a lot here in Blacksburg, Virginia. And people, I think it's a consensus of the P1 hardcore fans that are like, okay, we've seen what hasn't worked. Bringing in a guy, Brent Pry, probably Bud Foster's guy when he was a GA here, and trying to get the hotshot G5 guy. And obviously Fuente, they kind of want to do something completely different. But there's people who are pulling the strings that obviously have immense affinity for Beamer and the connection and different things like that. And Shane's going to be a very, very viable option here as things get closer down the line. With just the way things are going. So you can't mark that one off the list. Obviously other names are coming up, and they're going to come up everywhere. Like I said, these names are not exclusively to Virginia Tech, especially as these names pop up. You see Manny Diaz becoming a hot name for Penn State, obviously him being the DC there, but also here, obviously was a head coach at Miami, did nice things. There's a litany of other names, different names that have been leaked out that really got the message board triggered. If you want to go check those out on vtscoop.com and really jump in to the discussion. I know a lot can get lost in the mix over there and just people yelling at a wall. But I mean, there really is some nuanced discussion and thoughts on different things without just getting frustrated. You have some SEC coaches that look like they have their backs against the wall, and a Hugh Freeze and Mark Stoops are different guys that you could be looking at. The G5 row, as I touched on with Golis, Summerall. And then, like you said, you just lost Franklin. What other P4 guys? There's just other guys. And then there's the whole group that's out of coaching right now that you still can't look past that are all viable options. The NDA deal is going to be what it is. I mean, there's still going to be news and intel leaking out. I think there's really, really good coverage over on the site right now. I would go check out that Hotboard article, jump in the conversation, touching on that, touch on some names here. I know there's some comments in the chat. If you have comments, I'll get to those, expand on names even more. But it is still early in the process. It's October 13th. The committee just started meeting, last week? And some of the members weren't even there. Now, will we hear any of that with the NDA and different things? Who knows? But it is dysfunction. It's an 8-person committee. That is what you would expect with the 8-person committee, and politics involved and different things all involved, pulling the strings. It's just, not the way when you're at such a big inflection point with conference realignment and different things. But would you expect anything less? This is college football, so hop on the ride and enjoy it. And the best place to stay caught up is vtscoop.com. So go check it out over there.